Shippuden and Boruto falls flat. Even when it's fun and nostalgic, there's little here to make me seek it out over past entries that have basically the same fighting
Simply
system
put,
and better
Storm Connections is lacking content. The special story is good, but not exactly mandatory, and
I
that
bought the
alone
standard
hardly
edition on
justifies
Steam and will be refunding it because it is not worth $60, let alone $200.
So long!
When Bandai Namco announced Naruto x Boruto Ultimate Ninja Storm Connections, they made a promise to the fans that this was going to be the best game in the franchise. Connections had a lot riding on its success. It was the first new title in the Storm series in 7 years and as such, was supposed to be the big comeback for the series. But when it launched with reused content, broken online and an English dub so bad that people thought AI was used,
Did that wake you up?
the reception wasn't great. It currently sits as the lowest rated game in the Storm series, with many fans deeming it a step back from Storm 4, but did it really deserve all the hate? Some argue that it was supposed to be a filler game in the same vein as Storm Generations and Revolution, games that historically had lower budgets and that were developed to tide the fans over before the next mainline installment. For all we know, any second now, Itachi is going to point his fingers, release the Genjutsu, and we're all going to find out that Naruto Storm 5 has been in development this whole time. But then again, considering 5 packs of DLC were announced before the game was even released, I think Bandai Namco plans on supporting Connections for a while, and in a way I can see why they would want to. Fans were hyped when the game was announced. We were excited to see how things would change from Storm 4, and if new characters on our wish lists would make the cut. So what exactly happened? Well, let's see. CyberConnect 2's Naruto Ultimate Ninja franchise has been one of my personal favorites ever since I picked up a copy of Ultimate Ninja 3 in my local EB Games. Like with the Budokai Tenkaichi series for Dragon Ball, the most exciting thing to me was how you could recreate the battles from the series, or come up with your own what-if scenarios for how the story could have played out differently. Being a Neji fan myself, I usually played out scenarios like, what if Neji was the one who fought Gaara at the Chunin exams? Or what if Neji fought a piece of wood? The games were released in the early to mid 2000s when Naruto was rapidly gaining popularity in the West thanks to the anime making its English dub debut. And with fans eager to jump into the world of the #1 hyperactive knucklehead ninja, success was practically guaranteed for the Ultimate Ninja franchise. But the biggest selling point for the series was its roster of playable characters, which grew with each game. This was only possible because of how CC2 approached the story. They adapted whatever was available at the time and then picked up where they left off in the next title, giving them the chance to iterate on the roster over time by bringing their already designed characters from one game into the next, while also introducing new characters and tweaking old ones to better represent what was happening in the current story. This incentivized fans to pick up each release for the chance to pit their favorite characters against an ever-growing roster of ninja like
Sasuke is really cool. Sakura, the beautiful.
The reliable sales for the Ultimate Ninja series meant that CC2 found themselves a strong money printing machine to work on alongside their ongoing .hack games. Overall, there were 5 Ultimate Ninja games released for the PS2 and 4 spin-off titles released on the PSP with the Heroes and Impact games. And so, with CC2 having proven themselves, it was time for them to weave their hand signs and put their ninja magic to use with the first Ultimate Ninja entry in the HD era, kicking off the 7th generation of gaming in 2008 with Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm. Despite it being a sub-series, the Storm games have become the most well-known titles under the Ultimate Ninja banner, and a large part of that is likely thanks to how CC2 handled the story. While they were already well into adapting the events of Shippuden and Ultimate Ninja 4 and 5 on the PS2 around the same time, CC2 opted to retell the events of Part 1 to give Storm a fresh start and provide an experience that returning players and newcomers can both enjoy. But the story wasn't the only thing that was rebooted. As a first for the franchise, battles took place in an open 3D arena instead of the 2D Smash Bros style perspective of the previous games. The gameplay had a focus on being fast-paced, but stylish, and was designed for anyone to be able to pick up and play by featuring simplistic controls. All the while, the music kept that distinct Ultimate Ninja feel. But above all, the game's most praised feature was its anime-style visuals, which were considered the best in the industry. And even though there's been 15 years between the first and most recent game, the art style was so good at the time that there really hasn't been any major upgrades given to them.
They're the same picture.
So with all the boxes being ticked, hype was at an all-time high and fans were eager to pick the game up at launch. But since I was too broke to get a PS3 at the time, I spent every other weekend at a mate's house going head-to-head in free battle or working towards S-ranking all the story missions. Speaking of the story, as mentioned earlier, the first Storm game covered the events from part 1 of Naruto, but there was a glaring Haku and Zabuza-shaped hole in the final product. While the game had done everything else right, there was a noticeable absence of characters and story, those of which were represented in the previous Ultimate Ninja series, and this didn't sit quite well with the fans. For instance, the entire Land of Waves arc was skipped, meaning that the game didn't have space for Naruto's first 2 real adversaries. Yeah, I'm not counting you. Along with this, some characters that were playable in the previous series returned as assist only, meaning that while they were within reach on the character selection screen, fans couldn't play as them. These characters included the Sound 4, Asuma, Kurenai, Anko, Shizune, along with the first and second Hokage. Looking at this in hindsight, it makes sense why CC2 made these cuts. The development costs for games in the HD era are much higher, and unlike with the PS2 games, CC2 couldn't iterate on multiple releases to build the roster with this first Storm game. After all, they needed to catch up with the manga and anime as quickly as they could, essentially redoing Ultimate Ninja 1 through 3 in one game. But this need for them to cut corners right at the start of the series could be seen as a bit of foreshadowing for the problems that Storm Connections would run into 15 years later. Let me explain what I mean. CyberConnect 2, more specifically its CEO Hiroshi Matsuyama, has alluded to it being persistently difficult for them to develop games in the past, due to problems which seem to stem from budgetary limitations, and when you take a closer look, you can see how this affected each game. In CC2's defense, however, game development isn't exactly easy, and these guys were cracking out Storm games every other year, but I do need to touch on some problems that fans had with each game leading up to Connections to provide a bit more context. If I don't end up mentioning something that you think should have been here, let me know in the comments. Alright, so as I mentioned earlier, Storm 1 was missing key characters and story elements that were present in the previous Ultimate Ninja games, which made it feel incomplete. The follow-up game that was released 2 years later, Naruto Shippuden Ultimate Ninja Storm 2, removed Awakenings as selectable characters, which was a feature that Storm 1 had, and instead relegated them to temporary power-ups. The game also has arguably the worst animated Ultimate Jutsu, or Jutsus, in the series, but to play the defense for a bit, Storm 2 had an entirely new roster and introduced online play as a first for the series. And I just wanted to add that it has my favorite character select music, which is what you're listening to right now. With Storm 1 and 2, I think CC2 had a pretty good handle on the series and was making the most of what they had. And by the way, I won't be saying the full name of the games from this point on because I don't want to hear Naruto Shippuden Ultimate Ninja 358 Dream Drop Connections 1.5 remake. Storm Generations was the next game released 2 years after in 2012 and was considered the first filler title in the series, which is a term given by fans for games that don't continue the main story and instead introduce new once-off features and gimmicks to hold the fans over while the next numbered title was being developed. Its main selling point was that it featured original animation from Studio Puro, the company who produced the TV anime, answering the age-old question of what Sasuke would do against the Rasen Shuriken. It also combined the rosters from the first 2 games, giving fans a chance to play as the younger and older versions of various characters in the same game for the first time since the PS2. Supposedly, this is where the term Generations in the title comes from, as it's, I quote, the ultimate battle that crosses generations, which doesn't make much sense when you realize that these are the same characters and not from separate generations. Unless the game was referring to characters like the Hokage, young Kakashi, and Obito, but considering the logo has Naruto posing with his younger self, that's probably not the case. In hindsight, the name Generations would have worked better for a Boruto game and is actually used for the anime. Moving on to Storm 3 from 2013, it was the first game in the series to release a follow-up expansion at additional cost, and even had a re-release like a Street Fighter 4 to a Super Street Fighter 4 only half a year after the game came out. Fans who paid full price for the original at least had an option to upgrade it by buying the expansion, unlike a certain other series' third installment that had an ultimate re-release shortly after the base game launched. I think Storm 3 was also the first instance where playable characters were found to be cut content through data mining, in this case the Edo Kage, but I might be wrong. As a side note, there's a feature where blood can be visibly seen spraying from the characters when they take damage, but it was only for this game. I assume that age ratings has something to do with it being removed along with blood being colored black in Storm 4 and Connections. 2014 had Storm Revolution, and much like Generations, it acted as a filler title that also featured original animation from Studio Puro. The main draw this time was the inclusion of a Battle Royale mode exclusive to the game called the Ninja World Tournament. No, not that one. Yeah, that one. If you've been paying attention, you may have noticed something interesting with the release timing for the last few games. While Storm 1, 2, and Generations each had 2 years of development time between them, Generations 2, 3, and Revolution only had 1. And while this is actually a pretty impressive example of time management on CC2's part, this meant that fans were paying for a new installment of the series each year, with 2 of the games being considered lower quality. Finally, Storm 4 released 2 years after that in 2016. This was promoted as the last game in the series and is where it's most obvious that CC2 encountered problems with development. Unlike the previous numbered titles, Storm 4 had a menu-based story mode instead of the traditional RPG style. And while the previous entries told the story through in-engine cutscenes, Storm 4 adapted the events of the anime and manga mostly through stills, likely as a compromise to get the game done on time. Digging deeper, fans found a slew of content ranging from boss fight segments to stages and unfinished cutscenes that never made it into the final game. It also went on to receive additional content post-release like Storm 3 with the Road to Boruto expansion. But personally, for me, Storm 4's biggest crime was bringing back this monstrosity from Revolution when my boy Lars has been MIA since Storm 2. All in all, despite the problems with it, Storm 4 is a fan favorite for a reason, because while it did have issues, it ended up doing a lot right. But why bring all this up? Well, like I touched on earlier, fans had speculated that the team was having trouble with developing the series over the years, but it wasn't until 2021 when that was confirmed to be true by Matsuyama on CC2's official YouTube channel. He said, "The development for Storm 3 was also hard. Even though it technically shouldn't happen after 25 years, every year feels like our biggest battle yet. And as we break our previous records, it isn't getting easier at all. Every year is hard, so looking back at Storm 4, there isn't really much we could have done better. We were able to do everything that had to be done. That's the reason why it took so long, why we got behind schedule. It's also why we exceeded budget and ended up causing trouble to Bandai Namco Entertainment, why we ended up getting the publisher angry and ended up inconveniencing everyone. The result? Nevertheless, was still a pretty good game." Holy shit. I am speculating here, but personally, I think that Matsuyama spoke so openly about these problems because they were finished with the series and had been for several years at the time of the interview. It would have been odd for him to come forward and speak about how hard development for the series was and how much trouble they caused Bandai Namco if they were actively working on connections at the time. Which means, if that's true, that there weren't any plans for another game even in 2021, just 2 years before Connections launched. And even though Storm 4 became the best-selling entry in the franchise, it's clear that Bandai Namco fully intended to leave Storm behind after Road to Boruto, instead opting to go with lower budget releases, possibly due to the problems that CC2 caused. This idea is supported by the next game released, Naruto 2 Boruto Shinobi Striker. Developed by Soleil? Developed by Soleil, it was the only console Naruto game to come out between 2018 and 2023, and the first not to have been developed by CC2 since 2010. The game initially released with very little content while also reusing assets from the Storm series, and while it is still active, it hasn't seen any major expansion in the 5 years since launch, and instead has relied on DLC releases of popular characters for long-term support, like Baryon Mode Naruto, Six Paths of Madara, and Neji! But financially speaking, this worked out pretty well for Bamco. While Shinobi Striker underperformed to begin with, it sustained itself and eventually started turning a profit through the DLC support, which is still ongoing as of this video. And oh, if an anime game being kept alive for much longer than expected thanks to DLC sounds familiar to you, then you're probably thinking of Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2, which has been using this same strategy, and I suspect that Storm Connections might be going down the same path. And now that we know all this, let's finally talk about Storm Connections. Considering it had been 7 years since the last game, fans were hoping that CC2 was cooking something on the level of a numbered title for the franchise's long-awaited return. But as I speculated earlier, it's possible that Connections may not have even existed in 2021, meaning it could have had less than 2 years or so of active development, and if that's true, it would explain why the game was at a level more like Generations or Revolution instead of Storm 4. But while this can be seen as disappointing in hindsight, most people were happy that a new Storm game was being released at all, considering the series was supposed to end with 4, and honestly, it looked pretty interesting at first. The game was going to have 2 new story modes, new combat mechanics, and feature new characters that made their debut in the anime and manga since Storm 4. But of course, if it was a perfect game, this video wouldn't exist. So let's start the breakdown with History Mode, the first of the 2 new story modes. It aimed to retell the original story and compile the boss battles from previous games into one package, while also reworking them to include the new changes made to the battle system. And trust me, this sounded like a pretty big deal at first. Fans of the series had been asking for a way to experience the entire Naruto story along with its boss battles in one game, and it sounded like History Mode would make connections an instant buy. But unfortunately, that wasn't how it played out. Instead, the History Mode only featured 10 out of the 31 or so boss battles from the previous games, with the ones making it in being focused on Naruto and Sasuke. This left fan favorites that previously had a proper cinematic boss fight like Jiraiya vs Pain to be recreated in the style of a normal battle. Also, funny thing, I originally mentioned Guy vs Madara here too, but after actually playing some of the History Mode for my footage, I realized that the battle didn't even make it into the game and instead was only referenced in the character encyclopedia. Underwhelming to say the least. But hey, at least the story was done entirely through anime stills, something that people loved from Storm 4. The reception to History Mode ended up being very negative as fans felt like it didn't live up to its potential, but it wouldn't be fair of me to judge the story solely on that without mentioning the other one which was promoted as the game's main event, the Special Story. It was pitched as an original scenario set in Boruto's generation made specifically for the game. The Special Story introduced new characters and featured several new boss battles in CC2's classic style, albeit with a distinct lack of QTEs, but just looking at some of these should give you an idea of where the budget went. The story and characters were praised by fans, with many considering it the best part of the game, but said new characters not being playable and battles from History Mode being reused to pad the playtime were considered to be minor negatives by some. Overall, the Special Story was well received and helped to lessen the blow from History Mode. Next up, let's talk about the online and general gameplay. It's pretty well known these days that having a smooth online experience outside of Japan wasn't really a priority in a lot of Japanese games in the past, but when games like Guilty Gear Strive and Street Fighter 6 put extra effort into enhancing the experience, Storm fans were hoping that CC2 would take note and polish up Storm 4's netcode for Connections. And while this was wishful thinking, unfortunately Connections launched with its online in a rather poor state. It lacked basic features like the ability to play with friends or penalties for people who disconnect mid-game, leading to fake win streaks caused by rampant rage quitting, which is somehow a topic of discussion in a certain other Bandai Namco fighter. But the biggest fumble was that for the majority of Xbox users, the online was completely broken for several weeks after launch. Understandably, CC2 themselves don't consider Storm to be a competitive game, but it isn't unreasonable for the fans who support them to expect a functional online out of the box. Adding to the network issues, some fans weren't keen on the changes made to the battle system, which now encouraged a very aggressive playstyle, which seems to be the name of the game for fighting games recently. The chakra resource used for jutsu, which previously needed to be manually charged, underwent a drastic change. Now, along with manually charging it, it automatically refilled, leading to a lot more jutsu spamming. Pair this with the busted online and well, you're gonna have a bad time. The problem got so bad that it spawned its own niche of YouTube guides on how to beat it like it's a Souls boss or something. But even after all this, we haven't talked about the biggest controversy with Storm Connections, the allegations of AI being used to replace English voice actors. Now this is something that I already covered in a previous video and granted has seemingly been resolved at this stage, but it's a big enough issue to warrant covering here again. Okay, so, the problem started when fans booted up the game and noticed the questionable quality of the English dub. But it wasn't like the voices sounded low effort or anything, they just didn't sound like they were performed by professional voice actors, or humans really. After this started gaining traction, content creators like Stormmaster and Shonen Games decided to investigate further and they, along with several others, compiled voice samples to compare them with the previous games. The results were pretty damning and left everyone wondering why they even changed the lines in the first place. The topic started making waves on X, or Twitter, and eventually reached the official English voice actors of Naruto, Miley Flanagan, and Kawaki, Michael Schwab. As to be expected, they both reacted pretty negatively to what the fans showed them, and even implied that they didn't record those lines. While Miley gave her response and left it at that, Michael took it a step further and had the samples analyzed to search for AI use with the help of a friend. The results came back showing that AI generation was possibly involved after all, leading to the story reaching beyond X and appearing on several gaming news websites and YouTube videos. Considering the legal and ethical ramifications if this turned out to be true, Bandai Namco were forced to make a statement about the situation. Their conclusion was that AI wasn't involved and instead the voice lines were just the results of poor audio mixing. somehow. To CC2 and Bandai Namco's credit, this along with various other issues have since been fixed or are in the process of being fixed. But then again, going off what we've seen, it looks like all the problems Storm Connections has stems from it being rushed. If the game was so clearly unfinished, it would have been better for the brand and their reputation to delay it a few months, so that CC2 could polish it more. So why didn't they? Well, that would probably be because of the same reason why I think Storm came back at all. 2023 was the 20th anniversary for the Naruto anime, so it made sense to release a tie-in game to cash in on the opportunity. Only they didn't have any active Naruto console games on the market besides Shinobi Striker, which was released over 5 years ago. So instead of committing to an original title that would come with its fair share of risk, they played it safe and decided to use the Storm series, which had an already established fanbase, and this seemed to line up in favor of CC2 as well. From what I could gather after researching for this video, it's likely that CC2 took the job to develop Connections a couple of years ago, after some of their other projects didn't quite work out as planned. As it turns out, they were originally working on the Final Fantasy VII Remake from 2015 to 2017, but was supposedly cut from the project when Square Enix deemed their work unusable. Long story short, I think this has something to do with a suspicious gap in their release schedule that makes me think maybe CC2 was in need of work, but that's just my theory. So with it being the 20th anniversary for the anime and the game already releasing in November, it would have impacted the sales for it to be delayed past Christmas and into the new year. Bandai Namco likely saw any blemishes on the game as a worthwhile trade to make it in time for the holiday season. As for the future of Connections, Bamco have been favoring post-release DLC as their long-term support of choice, instead of releasing full-price sequels in recent years. And when you look at how well Xenoverse 2 and Shinobi Striker have done using this exact strategy, it doesn't really come as a surprise. DLC costs less to develop for, and in the current microtransaction-focused world of gaming, it's easier to convince people to buy add-ons rather than a full-price game. You can even see this mentality from the criticisms for Connections. A lot of the negative reviews mention that this game should have been DLC, and while I don't quite agree with that, yeah, it probably would have been better received that way, or at least if it wasn't sold at full price. In the end, I think Storm Connections was developed with DLC support in mind to replicate the long-term success of Xenoverse 2, but with the Naruto Storm brand. If you don't believe me, what if I told you that CC2 have already done something like this with another game? JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle was a game developed by CC2 for the PS3 back in 2013, and like with Storm, it was brought back in 2022 with the remastered title All-Star Battle R, and received ongoing DLC support until the end of 2023. Another point to mention for Connections is that CC2 have taken steps to try and retain players in the long run. Along with various other firsts for the series, it introduced login rewards and a character proficiency system, mechanics which are usually used more in mobile games to get players to create a habit of signing in and spend longer playing a particular game. Both of these elements are also present in one way or another for Xenoverse and Shinobi Striker, and unfortunately, this means that we probably won't be getting a Storm 5 for a very long time, if it even happens at all. After all, the poor reception to Connections doesn't exactly make the chances look good, and despite the negativity in this video, I do love the Storm series, so if it ends here, then that kind of sucks. But we'll need to wait and see.